sex advice segments this week have been a hit, man. With our Honest Women podcast, I wish we could take back the 45 or 50-minute statistic that they gave us a couple of days ago, where it takes a woman like 45 minutes to warm up. That's a long time, man.
That is.
That's a long time. I want to cross-check back that.
Yeah, we need to.
I need to find many surveys where it just says 4 minutes. Right. So, Andrea Berkeley and Jessica Hutchison from the Honest Women podcast have been joining us all week long. We listened to your suggestions on what you wanted them to talk about. And, while this is all about sex, the truth of the matter is today we're going to focus on relationship conflicts and communication. If you don't got good communication and you can't repair those conflicts or deal with them, sex is going to be bad, period, right? Mm-hmm. So let's get Andrea and Jessica in here. Hey, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning. Where do you guys want to start today?
Let's start with the big question that I think a lot of people ask, because I just want to come in with an opinion this morning.
Okay.
So a lot of times what happens in a marriage is that you've got one partner who's seeking connection and closeness through sex. And a lot of times you've got a partner who's seeking connection and closeness in emotions or through communication. And these people end up in a standoff. And so since we've been talking about sex all week, I think it would be good to just say that if the emotional connection is not there, like Bert said, sex isn't going to be good. And I personally don't think that sex is the first step. I think that the emotional connection between the partners has to be the first step.
Oh, you women and your emotions and communication. What a hassle.
Sorry.
There's some men who want that as well.
Two.
Men do. This is true. I agree. Here's the deal, though, is I think that we put the conversation on sex on a pedestal where it should not belong. I think it's just basic conversation that we don't have. And so what happens a lot with a couple is they're afraid to bring up the topic of sex because it feels risky to talk about it. And if we can simplify that and even incorporate it into a conversation almost on a yearly, a quarterly basis, it becomes less fragile. And, I think traditionally speaking, in heterosexual couples, we often see this sexual withdrawer, we call it in our EFT language, withdrawing from sex, but they pursue from more of an emotional standpoint. And so that can be very, very difficult to navigate when one person's pursuing for emotional but withdrawing from sexual, and then the other one is pursuing for sexual and withdrawing for emotional. That's where it gets very complicated.
So as far as having the conversations, what advice would you give to couples as far as once you broach a conversation about sex, which I know can be very difficult for one or the other to bring up to each other?
Yeah. So the most important thing I think is to say, I want to talk about this because I want to be close to you. And so a lot of times this cultural narrative that we have is men just want sex. And this is a narrative that can pervade our relationships. And when you start to feel, especially if there's emotional distance, that he just wants sex instead of he wants to have sex with me to feel close to me, that's where that standoff really digs in. And so if you're the person who's going to start the conversation about sex, I think it would be fair to say, I would like to have sex with you. I like to feel close to you. With that said, it's oftentimes the emotional pursuer. So the woman who already feels concerned, I guess, about the relationship that starts the conversation about sex and probably needs a lot of reassurance.
I'm half joking about this, but seriously, if you open up the conversation, you tell him what the motivation is, like, hey, I want to have more sex with you, he's going to listen to whatever the next sentence is.
100%. I would say, and if it's reversed, men, Now, men, when you approach this conversation, because you absolutely can, I just want to go ahead and put out there that it can be very, very sensitive for women, especially if they're going through body changes and they're not feeling very attractive. If they already feel less than, then coming at them with this conversation of, hey, I want to talk about sex is immediately going to put them on the defense because they already are really insecure about it. You would be shocked at the level of insecurity with women and sex drive that's going on right now. And so sometimes it can also be, you can use different terminology. I want to have a conversation about our love life. Doesn't have to specifically be sex, but that's part of the conversation. But I think it starts with frequency. And men, check in with your women about the frequency of sex. You might be surprised by the answer. So I've had women say, listen, I don't want to have these long drawn out sessions. I don't have that time, but you want to throw a couple quickies in once a week? I'm down. I would actually love it. It doesn't have to be about orgasm.
I know there's a lot of couples where there's one person who just seems to be a natural communicator, and then there's another who that's not their wheelhouse. Like, what advice would you give to the person who feels like they constantly have to be the one to communicate in those situations?
So I think the hardest part about this is that the person who tends to be the natural communicator is also the person. So let's just say women tend to be the better communicators. They tend to be the emotional pursuers. And so that's also the person who's feeling less into the sex part generally. It sucks to have to be the person that always brings things up. And it would go so far. Like if you notice that you're not feeling close to your partner, if you want to have more sex, but you also just want to have more connection, if you could bring that up in a way that is sensitive, if you could bring it up in a way that's appealing, right? I remember how close we used to feel. Remember before we had so much stress or before we had all these kids and we were so connected and vibrant. Remember that time, right? Remember that time when, and you can remember a specific time. I really want to feel close to you in that way. Man, it would take a lot of pressure off if a man could initiate that conversation.
If you say those words to a man to open up the conversation, I really want to feel close to you again. Will he interpret that as sex or will he interpret that as something very, very different?
You tell me, Bert.
Yeah, I'm like that. I don't know. That's a loaded question. It depends.
Very, very different.
But here's the deal is men will avoid these conversations just like women will avoid the bedroom. And I will say that avoiding these conversations, men, you're part of the problem. That contributes to it because it creates avoidance. And wherever there's avoidance, there is anxiety. And the more we avoid it, the bigger the anxiety gets. And so what I see is men afraid or uncomfortable having these emotional conversations, which creates more anxiety around it, just like women and having the conversation around sex within the bedroom.
You guys have been so great this week. This is the Honest Women podcast. They are on the Pioneer Network. Legally, I got to tell you guys that I own that thing. And this has gone so well this week that Honest Women are going to be recording episodes in the future on some of the stuff that we talked about, but we had limited time here. Infertility, body image, a whole series on marriage, including episodes on sex. They're going to do the whole thing. So you can
doing it all.
Doing it all.
We got a lot to say, Bert. A lot to say.
You might not be doing it in the bedroom, but they're doing it on their podcast.
Yeah, girl. You know we will.
It's the Honest Women podcast. You can find it on any podcasting platform.
The Bert Show.